Hello, my friends. Welcome back. Today is the 4th of October, and my thoughts are primarily at this moment, well, with a lot of people suffering in the world, but certainly in this instance, at this moment, with the people of North Carolina in the United States. I lived in North Carolina for a long time. My daughters were born in North Carolina, my beautiful daughters, one in Raleigh and the other in Durham. And it seems as I've just heard the government is not giving the people suffering there because of the hurricane Helene, not providing as much assistance perhaps as they should. So my thoughts and prayers are at this moment with the people of North Carolina. I wanted to talk today about something that has been on my mind for a while, and that is how to defend our civilization in the West, our Christian civilization, that is being attacked. It has been attacked for a long time. It has been attacked perhaps continuously since the founder, Jesus Christ himself, died on the cross. I said it has been under continual attack since he died on the cross, but its first enemies, the first heresies, were fought outright, forthrightly, with a saber, as it were, with a sword. The attacker being there in front of you. You could see who the attacker was. But since the French Revolution and secularism, it has rather been attacked with a dagger, a knife, from the back, on the back, surreptitiously, perfidiously, sometimes even with a kiss. You don't see the attacker up front, not up front, the way of a traitor. And we have to fight back now. So I say, let's start forging our swords. Let's fight back. And fight back, I'd say, with a saber rather than a dagger. It's more noble. And they, traitors, are all cowards after all. Let me start by saying that what we are experiencing at the moment is a society, a nihilistic society, deconstructing what had always been. And so what we have to find out now is how to be the man standing, facing this world of ours in ruins, facing this last man, as Nietzsche put it. The last man in our times, not chronologically speaking, although that could be the case too, but the man of post-Modernity, the man of deconstruction, the man of globalism, and in each of our countries, the anti-nation man, the English anti-English or anti-England, the American anti-America, the French anti-France, the German anti-Germany, however much they wish to disguise it. So, how are we to embody, especially, precisely the opposite, the antithesis to this last man? I am a traditionalist. Traditionalism is not the same as conservatism. I am talking here about the essence of a civilization where everyone in that civilization understands almost unconsciously what is almost in the DNA, the common sense of that civilization. In China, for example, is Confucianism. In India, Hinduism. Of course, things will change with the passing of time, and cultural values will evolve according to the times, but the essence, the home, that something, that very first stone, that foundation, the framework upon which everything else depends and from which everything else derives, unless destroyed outright, up front by a revolution that is going to throw it all away. The French Revolution, for example, the Russian Revolution, for example. Destroy and rebuild anew, said Lenin. But if it remains what it is, in essence, if it maintains its essence, as is evolving over time, the cornerstone is that tradition, that home, that foundation stone upon which everything else is built. I say I'm a traditionalist, not necessarily a conservative, because that would depend, being a conservative would depend very much on what you want to conserve, to preserve. The term for me is too small. It is not as broad as tradition. Some have defined this difference as civilization and culture. This culture, the present one, is post-modernism, is what we have here in England today. For example, many countries as well. Excuse me. And many people do not agree with it and would like to change it, to go back to what it was, to conserve what we had. That's fine, absolutely fine. But to go back to what we had when? The 19th century, the 20th, the 18th? Well, you see, to me, in the case of Europe, as I see it, I would take it further back to that later called European, but to that understanding when the whole of Europe was called Christendom. Greek thought, Roman law, Christian Catholic religion. Before that, civilization was splintered into tiny little pieces. They had to do that, divide and conquer. When we all shared a worldview, a cosmovision of who we were, and because we knew who we were and what we stood for, we could fight invading hordes of different peoples, different civilizations, if attacked. The First Crusade, even though it was a defensive battle, I have a video on the First Crusade, by the way, where I showed it was a defensive battle. That is how it started, against Islam invasion at the time. Well, this is seen today by many as something terrible that we did. After all civilizations are the same, they cry, and in any case, Christian, aren't you supposed to turn the other cheek? That old chestnut, which is something very perfidiously used to make you feel bad about defending yourself. It's actually an abuse. And remember that Christ himself went to the temple which was being misused to buy and sell as if it were a marketplace, and had a bit of a go there himself. And since I'm a traditional Catholic, it comes natural to me to speak of duties rather than rights. The idea of rights was introduced by liberal thought after the Protestant Revolution, and from then on gradually the concept of the individual rather than the community. By the way, I don't like to say individual so much, we say person. So yes, one has the duty to protect oneself. A father has the duty to protect his family. A civilization has the duty to protect itself. A nation has the duty to protect itself. The differences between a postmodern man and a man of tradition, I'd like to say something about this. Because here we have a radical, insurmountable, antagonistic difference. And if we are to overcome these dark times in which we live, between these there is a need to see the difference between this postmodern man and the man of tradition, between these two structures, these two frameworks with which we see the world. So where do they differ, these two worldviews, and why are they irreconcilable? They are irreconcilable because they are two absolutely opposite worldviews. Perhaps in talking about it, there should be a sort of in-between between these two extremes, these two viewpoints, a middle point, the modern man. Because modern man was that secularized sublimation of what tradition itself was. And therefore in modernity, and modernity we call that space of time between, say, the French Revolution and the First World War, that was modernity. In those times we still find a strong culture, strong ideologies. We find attempts and facts at social revolutions, social transformations, in many cases attempting to create utopia, idealism, introduce the perfect society. That is what moved them at the time. The difference is that postmodern man is the example of the failure of that modernity, the secularization of the sacred. So postmodern man goes beyond creating that utopia that modern man wanted to create, because now he starts, or believe he can, build that utopia within himself, within his own personal limited reality, where subjectivity, his own reality, is what he is going to use for his own deification. He is God to himself and expects you to see him as such. Total subjectivity here. The man of tradition, unfortunately, is faithful to something that is no longer here with us. It's gone. It's no longer there, it's lost, it has been lost. There are some remains here and there, remains from what we have been able to gather from and hear from our ancestors, their writings, history. So it's not completely, categorically lost. There are embers somewhere that can be rekindled. Tradition, a traditionalist view, demands of you first an acknowledgement of your own human limitations in space and time, but also acknowledging of something that we call eternity. You can understand this in a religious sense, but here's the thing, not only in the religious sense of eternal life, no. Also in the sense of your own role in your civilization, what you have inherited, what you will leave behind for generations to come. An acknowledgement of this tradition you have inherited, and an acknowledgement that it is something more than yourself, beyond yourself. The postmodern man negates eternity. Not that he doesn't know the meaning of what eternity means, but in the sense that he wants to bring that eternity to earth, wants to live it, experience eternity, though he knows very well that life is ephemeral and very temporary, very, very short. And so he has this constant contradiction going on in his psyche of trying to coexist with absolutely contradictory concepts. And this is not the only contradiction. He has confused body and soul. The soul is what gives us true freedom. The truth will make you free, remember, which he has turned, inverted into freedom will give you truth, your own relative truth. Today people want to feel free through the transfiguration of his body, aesthetics, not to mention sex change and so on. To build his identity through the body. The soul is something that prevents him from doing that. The soul to him, right and wrong, he sees as a denial of freedom. There is an inversion here that from which traditional man is not going to suffer. The soul for the man of tradition is called to eternity in all its aspects. The body is the instrument. The man of tradition knows that the body was given. This is one of the keys here. Traditional man knows that he has been given, granted all, even his will, and with it his freedom to choose. Life was given to him, to me, to you. The place where you were born was given to you. Your parents were given to you. The citizens with whom you share your life experiences were given to you. Your culture, your environment was given to you. But this does not banish your freedom, curiously, but it is the framework within which we're going to live our lives, our experiences, our projects and our hopes, what we do and how we do it, the ultimate goal, eternity. So between the two men, I say there is an unbridgeable distance in terms of horizons, in terms of the objectives, the aims. The direction, the north of tradition, is ultimately transcendence, beyond yourself, as if the body was too small for that soul we have inside. Whereas for postmodern man is the other way around. The north for him is pure materiality, materialism. Despite possibilities, apparent possibilities of joy and pleasure, these are superficial and short-lived. Because if something is typical of this postmodern man is that wish to be different from everybody else. To think of the universality of humanity is something difficult for him to conceive. So he's always thinking about his own self as the starting point and the end point. No universality there. So he's always at pains to create his own project himself. And it all ends up in that individualism, actually hyper-individualism, which more curiously still, it ends up in a certain standardization. Have I said that right? The fashion, what's in. It all ends up rather disastrously in that believing himself to be completely different to anyone else, in some sort of twisted sort of way superior to anyone else, which is another paradox. They're always talking about equality, but each one is trying to be different from everyone else, not to find anything in common. But he wants to be different, distant from everyone else. And that same individualism actually brings them all back together. A similarity there of wanting to be different, each one of them makes them all the same. They're all in the same bandwagon. Another contradiction. Another form of schizophrenia. People, little by little, absorb these absurdities and configure mentally a world that is rather schizophrenic, but it also leads to all manner of other ills, depression, desperation, never enough, deranged. The man of tradition acknowledges that differences are natural. We're all different in intelligence, in disposition, in physical power, whatever it might be. We have margins with which to operate, but what has been given to us, it has been given to us in such a special way that that is what actually differentiates us all and makes us special. The soul. We're talking here about the dignity of man. A man of tradition is not an individual with its Protestant liberal connotation. He is a person in all its Catholicity. He knows his destiny, knows within what hierarchy he operates. And that means, besides many other things, that he knows the difference between a human person and an animal. He doesn't humanize the animal, which is actually, as I see it, an insult to the animal because it goes contrary to its nature. Nor does he want to animalize the human being, which goes contrary to his nature, both their natures. Since I brought up the example of animals, let me say to you that I have absolutely nothing against animals. I respect animals. I actually come from a background of true peasants. My uncles and aunts are still today, to a large extent, peasants. And I can tell you, when I used to visit them during the summer, how they view the animals were part of the family. The animals lived, sort of next door. There was only, between where they lived and the stable, there was only but a partition. The animals were part of the family. I will not accept that they did not love the animals as much as you love your dog or your cat. They did. And the chickens. But nevertheless, every now and then they would go get the chicken and twist its neck and kill it. And I remember that the first time that I saw it, I almost freaked out. Oh my God. And my cousin, who was my age, I must have been around 10 or 11, didn't think anything of it, saw it as natural. And that thought stayed with me for a very long time, because I could see that it's not that that killing an animal was not an act of violence or an act of cruelty. They saw it as something kind of natural, which I couldn't understand. I think that I have thought about it many times, because what I have to tell you, I have to insist on this, they love their animals. They're part of the family, the animals, the cow and the pig and the chicken. I think I have thought about it. How do I bring these two things together, And what I come up with is actually the fact that this is what I have sort of decided, that the way they live, they lived in an ordered world, a hierarchical world. They're not, I don't think, able to express it in these terms, but I see it as they are very comfortable in that hierarchical world, an orderly structure of the world, not closed, not closing itself or to itself, which would bring you problems with your relationship with the rest of nature. But an orderly conception that where everyone has a function within the same system, where each thing has a purpose. And that is what I think we have to discover within ourselves. What is the purpose of the community? What is the purpose of many things? In this day, the purpose of sexuality, for example. That's another characteristic. The man of tradition is always a man of community, a social nucleus, a core that allows that man to find himself and to which we voluntarily submit ourselves. However high, however low, our potential to live that, what the classics called the virtuous life. Virtuous life meant in a different way. That life that brings you happiness and peace, to be at peace with yourself, satisfaction within yourself, peace. Postmodern man thinks that what will make him happy is what he decides will make him happy. There is no connection with others. I propose to myself my own goals, my own desires, all right, but those desires are unconnected to anyone else. It's me and it's about me. But then you see what happens is when I think that I have achieved them, they fall apart. And then postmodern man needs to think of new desires. That is to say, he's a man constantly wishing, searching, looking always towards a goal that he never achieves. In other words, in a man of tradition, there is order, harmony, meaning, and a sense of transcendence. He is not the center of the universe, he's part of something. In the other, in the postmodern man, there is an individualism made almost sacred, a sort of an idolatry of the ego, a contagious idolatry, because they all want to have it. And that's why few can stand each other. They all want to be the creator and not the creature. The man of tradition looks at his son. He knows his son will grow up and will have to learn from experience. He will have to have a few crushes a few times, will have to learn to become independent, but nevertheless the father is always there somehow, is always looking, is always attentive. He never leaves him completely, absolutely alone. He's always there, in case. Postmodern man leaves him to lead his own life now. There is, of course, a biological and an economic connection, but when he finishes his university studies, for example, off he goes. There is an old maxim, prayer, formation, action. Action for the sake of action alone is blind. You're always in continuous activity, an activism that burns, that destroys ideals. Many young people today, without much experience, they are all going to do this, going to do that, going to do so many things. That's perfectly okay. It is true that when you're young, you want to change the world, and I'm in favor of of them having that idealism. That I think is a healthy attitude in the young. But the question is, towards change, towards what? Towards where? What's the context? Not change for the sake of change, surely. And the context, the direction, and the guidance is given by formation. That is, the education of the whole being, not just educational disciplines like geography and mathematics. The complete formation, intellectually, morally, spiritually. And that is not just an individual enterprise. We cooperate. None of us is a teacher to that extent. A lot comes from, we need a lot from those who can guide us from childhood. And for that we need a tradition, a school. So this is what I'm trying to say. In modern times we see that very clearly. Philosophical schools, art schools have practically disappeared. And where they are, each student is both a teacher and a student. He teaches himself. There is no true formation because there is no tradition, there is no continuity. And art is considered art even if it involves the destruction destruction of what you have made yourself, or others made for you, or your ancestors have done. And you destroy it because you no longer have that sense of immortality within you. You're left, all you have is simply expressing yourself. That's what you have. And that is not art. That's an expression of yourself, expressing yourself. Is your opinion of yourself. And even that opinion you have of yourself may or may not be accurate many times. A true artist, like a prophet, is not a man who simply expresses himself. He's not even one who predicts things or the future, but a man who guides. In the Old Testament, of course, God was speaking through the prophets, through the prophet. Well, artists, true artists, do not, of course, hold that God is speaking through them, but they could claim, in a certain sense, that if he is a true artist, he is expressing truth. The truth of things is speaking through him. And the truth, not his own individual opinion. That is not what a true artist is. If a person is simply expressing his opinion of things, I don't think it makes you an artist, but I could be wrong. A singer, a good singer with a beautiful voice, she has a gift. That gift does not necessarily make you an artist. What makes you an artist is whether through your beautiful voice you are expressing the truth that is guiding others through beauty. If you are not using it for truth, for guidance, you're not an artist, in my opinion. You're simply displaying your gift, your beautiful voice. You are displaying yourself. The question is, for whose benefit? Your own? That to me is not an artist. The man of tradition knows he's part of something much larger than himself. He's part of what was once, and of what is now, and of what is to come. We need parents, we need teachers, and we need friends and camaraderie. It is a more humble understanding of yourself, being part of something else, not arrogantly thinking that you are the center of it all. Because when reality strikes you, actually showing you that you're definitely not the center of the universe, then you will crumble and crash like a castle in the sand. And then you're going to talk about mental health when it is in fact spiritual absence. But this is the world we live in. So if I or you, I'm feeling a stranger in my own times, I'm feeling a stranger in my own country, in my own culture, in my own civilization, alien, and many of us are. If I am closer to the knights of the past, of medieval times, closer to the chanson de geste, That's where I am. If I am closer to the tradition of my own civilization, to that we have today of post-modernity, what can I do if I can't find myself in this postmodern spiritual desert? What are the keys, at least, to survival? It is not much, since everything has been destroyed. Well, not everything, as I said, there are a few remains here and there. We have to first get back to those roots, to get rooted, close to reality. The philosopher Heidegger, German, said once that we are beings who have been thrown to the world. Thrown to the world. No, never. I can't help it, I'm Catholic. The traditional Catholic understanding is that we have been received into the world. We are born into a family, into a community. We are not giraffes, that when they give birth, they just throw them like arrows into flowers, wherever. Our sense of the spiritual is basic. Anyone who cares to reflect for 2 minutes will find that materialism is ultimately an ideology, a symbolic configuration of interpreting reality. And reality without spirituality takes us nowhere, leads us to a cul-de-sac. There is a deeper understanding in this absent-minded world. Brought up a deeper understanding of traditional man in this absent-minded world. Someone said, I don't remember who, we live in a world full of entertainment watched by sad people. All that entertainment is to mislead. Spiritual authority is basic. One of the great misfortunes of the West is not only the loss of faith, secularization, that's bad enough, but if more was needed, was also that loss of the sense of the hermit. What do I mean by hermit? The man who is capable of facing alone the entire cosmos. Not just in a Buddhist sense, solitude per se with an ontological purpose. To accept that Buddha doubtless will leave you smiling, but will leave you alone. In the Christian sense, in that solitude, nothing is going to perturb you. Nothing is going to bother you when you're there by yourself. That plenitude, which is an encounter with God. Actually, a present-day hermit was a Catholic priest living the life of a hermit in an island near the Balearic Islands. Actually wrote in a cave where he was. He wrote, "By myself in solitude with God." By myself alone, in solitude with God. That is, I am alone, but not lonely. Not in that loneliness or isolation of postmodernism, because solitude is not the same as loneliness, and loneliness is not even that isolation that modern man suffers from, just himself. No one else matters. An isolation, that isolation means that there is no rootedness. Does that word exist? There are no roots. An example, we can see this actually visually in cities. The cement on the pavement prevents us from touching the soil. That sensation of stepping on actual soil, almost living soil, is also spiritual. It feeds the soul. If you are rooted, you will resist anything, like a tree. The deeper the roots, the stronger it can be there standing against winds and storms. If you don't have roots, a little breeze will blow you away. Where? Nowhere, anywhere. Does it matter? Yes, stay rooted, forge tradition. If not, you may be one like one of those children sliding away in their skating boards, you know. Not knowing where you're coming from, not knowing where you'll end up. Somewhere is not enough. Somewhere, anywhere doesn't feed the soul. In all probability, we will die certainly not where we were born. I'll give you an anecdote. The person was visiting a very good friend, and that friend said, they were all gathered around the dinner table, and that friend said, I was born on this table. What happened was many years ago that his mother went into labor and there was an emergency, and in that emergency they put her on the table, and anyway, he was born there. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all have our children on the kitchen table here, but what I want to point out is that that sense of almost enthroning the cosmos in history, it's interesting because the modern world tries to completely break that possibility of that coming together with your roots, that reunion. I mentioned the hermit. In solitude, at home. So, what do we have now? At the other end, in the opposite extreme of the hermit, alone with himself, and with the cosmos, and with God. At the other extreme, the antipodes of having roots. I was born on this table. I'm stepping on real soil, on earth, on land. At the other extreme, we have the modern city, modern civilization, a betrayal of what is natural. Now we are living in times of, I don't want to get into biblical language, the Antichrist, to use biblical language. And what is that? The masses, the opposite of the hermit. It is the sublimation of the individual, profoundly nihilist. But since that nihilism is difficult to live with, is difficult to tolerate, to assume, because you have a reasoning capacity and a will and a soul, even if you don't want it. That soul will not withstand that, cannot endure all the consequences of where nihilism takes us. And so then we construct this mass society where we find this artificial contact with humanity. It's like a biological pantheism. We've always had the same past. In the past, we always had this, the modesty, let's say, of touching or not touching each other according to whom, according to the times, respecting the other person's dignity, to know when you can hug a person or not, treating each other according to his own dignity as a person. And now we have a sort of football stadiums and concerts and clubs. That is, this dignity of the other is replaced with the anguishing need in this absolute loneliness for some contact, a symptom of the isolated man. Erich Fromm said that, the German philosopher, he said that in the Middle Ages, however much we want to criticize it or whatever, he said in the Middle Ages, no one man ever felt alone. Meaning that he never experienced that devastating isolation from everybody else. You had your family, you had your village, you had your fraternity that you belonged to, you had your guild that you belonged to. He didn't, it might seem kind of absurd or perhaps too harsh, but medieval man didn't even die alone. And there are still places where there are fraternities that will accompany the deceased, not to be buried alone if there is no one around in these days. Today's man even annihilates himself, kills himself. Throughout history, there have always been people who kill themselves. But mind, for example, the harakiri or the seppuku in Japan did that because there was something higher there, superior to himself, that demanded his life. Could be the honor of the clan, whatever it was, something higher that demands submission. But today is different. This bringing death to oneself is the act itself is isolated, is hidden, is uncelebrated. Durkheim, who was a French sociologist, is one of the fathers of sociology at the end of the 19th century. He did then a very famous study on suicide. And he found actually the correlations that in those places where there was a family and there was a community and there was this religion as opposed to no religion or another, he found that there were less suicides. It goes back all the way to ancient times, it goes back to the idea of sacrifice, back to biblical, classical times, in mythology. Someone in the community would have to be sacrificed to the gods, so that the whole community may prosper. In ancient times, or if you wish in religion now, Jesus Christ as the eternal sacrifice for the whole of humanity. Nothing strange about sacrifice. We now, unable to sacrifice ourselves to nothing beyond ourselves, not even sacrifice to ourselves, bit of self-discipline at times, not even to ourselves, we are condemned to sometimes annihilating ourselves. But it's not a sacrifice in this old sense. It is actually escape. And so we have, we're now living in a sick society. There's depression, anxiety of anxiety, insomnia, suicide, loathing of one's job, of one's own life, inability to love, have real friends, a community, alienation from ourselves and others. The portrait is a rather pessimistic one. We are in the dark, in a dark night, the howling of wolves, the age of iron. And to shed light, postmodern man, who is the one that creates this society and feeds it, is a vicious circle. How to survive it? Well, we have talked about postmodernism and its culture and what it has created. We also acknowledge that for the most part, tradition is dead. So, what do we do next? How can we become once more men of tradition and sow a new traditional cycle, faced as we are with this dark night of globalism and postmodernity? Several keys here against this debacle. Let's try best we can to rekindle back, if we can, however much or however little, that sense, that humble beginnings, that sense, that idea of community. It might be difficult, but somehow we have to start somewhere. Community is not the same as communism, obviously. All things in common, all people one, towards utopia. No. A community is a relationship among persons who are aware of their own dignity as human beings, each one of them, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and the CEO of whatever. Each one of us, regardless of our social status in the community, each one respected for his own role in that community, each one, however high or low, each one, even the village idiot, has a place, a role, and all form part of that community. Each has worth. If you don't have a community, you have tribalism. And community is not voting every 4 years either, where we feel part of something. A community is where we feel part of something beyond us, and at the same time safe, gathered together. The word guild in Latin is gremium, which means bosom or lap or the hardcore. That was the community. They will embrace you. protect you. And you also participate actively in it. Go back to that sense that sure, we need safety, but also we are there in case anyone else needs it and ready to offer it. This is basically the regeneration of life, transmission of generation after generation. Everything is being destroyed now, even ourselves. Look at the fertility rates. There are many factors here, I understand, economic factors and the like. But it's not just economic factors. In reality, it is a collective psychological problem of a whole society that unconsciously does not want to live. A civilization that does not want to survive because life no longer has meaning, and we are unconsciously exterminating ourselves. Community. Restore authority. Post-Modernism rejects, even in the family, the concept of authority. The family, that spiritual womb, someone called it. This is crucial. This is why now we have this postmodern battle of gender ideologies, the patriarchal society and all that nonsense. All against heterosexual men, manly men. A continual, uninterrupted battle against them. In a language very carefully selected, but one that goes always inevitably against the natural authority of the paterfamilias, of man, manliness, absolute man. Hollywood has been an effective vehicle for this. If you go back, starting already in the 70s, but really in the 80s, the sitcoms, where the man of the house is always the pathetic character, the idiot, the one to laugh at. It's always the father. Hollywood is used to change culture, traditions. It was used very effectively, for example, to change our views about homosexuality, for it to be accepted. Remember all the movies of the 80s? I remember one that I liked very much, actually, with Jack Nicholson, As Good as It Gets. I think this is from the 1990s. And he depicts a heterosexual man, depicted obviously as a neurotic, obsessive-compulsive, who of course dislikes his gay neighbor, etc., etc. What is this? What is it, this loathing of men, of heterosexual men? Look, you have an office. He works in an office. There is another man working there who's a gay man. They both earn more or less the same salary. The gay man keeps it for himself and does with it is his salary, whatever he wants. Whatever he wants to do with his money, obviously. The heterosexual man has children to support, to send to school, to buy them clothes with that same salary, to pay for their holidays if they can enjoy one from time to time. This is for both men and women, obviously. They are in fact propagating the species, preventing self-extinction. Any tax breaks for those who have families and are ensuring the survival of the species, nothing less? No. Any acknowledgements here? No. They're always fathers, the idiots of the sitcoms. This hurts. I admit that we women have not done a good job in coming to their defense. They themselves are not very good at this. They're good at fighting back, in different ways. They go hunting and kill a lion and compete for power. But not when they are attacked like this, in this way, with a dagger, psychologically. We women should have done a better job at defending them in this case. But we didn't do it. Mainly because the fight was led by women who have known no men themselves. And a lot of women bought the feminist thing. Feminism is not pro-women, is against men. And it's actually against women too. That's how I see it. And we ended up in this psychotic, eco-feminist, communist chaos where the male has lost his dignity as male. Nothing better, nothing, the first thing if you want to destroy society. And he created male and female, essential both, each with a distinct role, beautifully complementing each other. Yes, I said beautifully. And we have this example now of men dressing as women, attacking that dignity of the male and at the same time mocking womanhood. We are complementary, both. Male in his absolute manliness and female in her absolute femininity. Okay, so we have mentioned authority, we had mentioned community, hierarchy, order. The community destroyed because, among other things, the principle of authority was destroyed. And you destroy the male, and so you destroy the family, the pillar of each civilization. Take away the family, you take away the community. What you've got left now is the state. So let's go back to that Catholic principle of prayer, formation, action. Prayer in the sense of also meditation, discernment, contemplation. I have a soul and I have a dignity, and I am not keeping the same rhythm as that of the world. I have my own soul and my own rhythm. Each soul has its own. Don't impose your own rhythm or your own noise on mine. We are all in need of our own moments. We need to be with ourselves a while. We need something else. We also need a fundamental thing, friendships. Aristotle, when speaking of tyranny, it's about 400 BC, knew as much. He said that the greatest enemy of tyranny, of the tyrant, is when citizens cannot make friends amongst themselves. That is what he said. It's very difficult nowadays to find true friendship, friendships that last a lifetime. We may not have many, but those we have are true friends. And those true friends, that has been substituted by a sort of sporadic, temporary relationship, false friendships, and true love confused with sentimentalism, or worse. So, authority, hierarchy, community, friendship, prayer, meditation, contemplation, solitude, and also a historical sense. We belong to a country, a homeland, which is more than just living side by side at the same time in the same geographical space with others. And in order to look towards the future, we need references from the past. The homeland is that continuity of generations. We have received something from our ancestors, and that something is valuable. It took blood, sweat, and tears. We have to respect it and enjoy it and pass it on and be grateful. And when that continuity is broken, the individual is left alone, without anchor, without a past. Without a past, you have no future. You don't even know who you are. Not really. You are alone, and you'll succumb at the slightest blow. Roots, community, authority, prayer, friendship, and hope against these ideologies, because tradition is a doctrine of a kind. The principles of life that we are somehow prudently applying to life as honestly as we can. Remember that ideology is a closed-up rationalist framework that says to you, this will make you happy, but you have to go through this loophole. You have to accept this and that. I mean hope in the sense that you understand. I mean it in a different sense, in the hope that we understand that life has a destiny, that it has meaning. The classics say that what gives meaning to anything is having a final objective, an aim. Why am I here? What was I born for? An ultimate objective allows us to guide our actions, to have a north, to have direction. People don't think of this because we live in the instant moment. And sometimes some think they are going to live forever. We want to deceive ourselves that way. There is very soon we will live until we are 300 years old. No. We're going to die. There is nothing we can do about that. And hope, the aim, is the working towards something. Hope as a virtue, not as wishful thinking. And it's a very beautiful thing. It's not like ideologies. It's not a Marx's concept of history that will take us to paradise, where everyone is equal, universal democracy for everyone, even if it is against your will. Marx said that religion is the opium of the people. So instead, he said, we shall tear apart that veil of religion and tradition. And all they left us with is darkness and obfuscation, and a disease of the mind, and a spiritual emptiness. And man is becoming deranged, and people are desperate. How to persuade others of the importance of tradition? Because even if we agree about the importance of tradition, we not only have to confront the whole world, but also ourselves. We have, to a large degree, ingested that poison. How do we get sane again? And to begin with, let's surround ourselves with honest people to begin with. Look for sincerity, authenticity. That's another concept that has been falsified. Oh, we have to be authentic. No, true authenticity, sincerity, and recognize that friendships are a gift too. Friends are given. You don't say, I am going to make a friend of this person. Or if you fall in love, I am going to fall in love with him. No, it's a gift. Friendships are given. If one day you discover how much you owe to those before you, those real people, and you want to pass that on, be faithful to that tradition. I know that this is only a minority of people, if that, a mini minority. But we can be the seeds, small as they are, but the seeds which will enable us to recover from the ashes that Christian civilization that once embraced us all, instead of either that or just continue falling into this abyss of nihilism. In the past, some societies, when they were invaded by hordes from another tribes, instead of fighting, they decided to just surrender and die. They didn't understand what was happening to them. Their whole cosmovision was shattered. It was sinking as they saw it. They saw it. And the collective decided to let themselves die. They didn't know what else to do. Couldn't fight back. And this is what's happening to us, and we have to recover our tradition. We have to go back to those ashes, those few embers left here and there, and enkindle them again. I'm going to finish, but the way I started, that our Christian Catholic tradition has been attacked continuously since the founder, Jesus Christ himself, was on the cross. And forgive me, I say Catholic and not Christian, because that is the truth. Because nowadays I see continuously American Protestantism, that they're doing with the word Christian as they did with the word America. They have taken it over. And American Protestantism is Calvinist Protestantism, which in Catholic theology is a heresy, or at least it was until yesterday. And what the world sees as Christianity is their own interpretation of it, which is not accurate. And I said that it has been under continual attack since Jesus died on the cross, but its first enemies, as I said, I mean the first heresies, were fought outright, saying, this is what I believe, I disagree with the Catholic Church, whatever, Jesus is not divine, Jesus is not man, whatever it was. But they attacked it forthrightly so that one could defend, the Church could defend herself, could defend the doctrine. So what I said was that they attacked it with a saber, with a sword, the attacker being there in front of you, and that you could see who the attacker was. But since especially the French Revolution and secularism, it has rather been attacked with a dagger from behind, on her back, surreptitiously and perfidiously, and sometimes, of course, even with a kiss. You don't see the attacker not up front. He attacks from behind. We have to fight back now. So let's forge our swords. Let's start to fight back. But let us fight back with the saber rather than the dagger. It's more noble. And they, traitors, are always cowards, after all. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.